accidentally just created an entire video self-tweeting the US Health Secretary.
Hello lovely people, I'm Jessica, my pronouns are she, her, I'm disabled and have ADHD, and I talk openly—
Ugh, not you as well. Everyone wants to label themselves as ADHD nowadays, or autistic. Are you autistic too?
I'm not autistic, but I do talk openly about being disabled because it's not something I feel people should need to hide or be ashamed about.
Oh good. Back in my day, we didn't have all these people with autism.
Well, I've actually already talked about that particular misconception in one of my Toolkit for Talking to Boomers videos. However, autism has been in the news a lot recently, so I want to do a deeper dive into whether more people are autistic nowadays. I'm hoping this video can act as a resource for people who have to deal with these kinds of comments and questions frequently. I'd love it to be one you can share with people who are on their way to being allies to autistic and other neurodivergent people, but who maybe need a little help.
And if breaking down myths and misinformation about neurodivergence and disability sounds like your kind of thing, you should definitely hit the subscribe button below. Social media platforms, and even YouTube, are becoming increasingly hostile to LGBTQ+ creators, and subscribing is your best chance of finding your way back to my channel to watch future videos.
Unfortunately, while I was working on this video, good old Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the current US Secretary of Health and Human Services, started to make a number of truly absurd and demonstrably false statements about autistic people. I wanted to address some of his misunderstandings about autism as they feed into a broader narrative that autism is an epidemic, or that the increase in autism diagnoses over the last few years is worrying.
But it is! Why are there so many more people who are autistic nowadays?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of factors to consider in answering this question, so join me as we break it down. Intentional historic invisibility. First, a quick content warning. In this section of the video, I'm going to talk about the history of how autistic people have been treated in the UK in the past. I have done my best to avoid any outdated and offensive language that we use to describe autistic and disabled people, but do share some details about how autistic people were institutionalised and dehumanised.
I'll put the timestamp on screen now in case you need to skip this section. Please take care of yourselves.
When we talk about the increased visibility of autistic people in 2025, we have to acknowledge the ways that autistic people were deliberately hidden from public view. In the past, disabled people were often institutionalised, stripped of their agency and humanity. A 2024 blog post by private assessment providers, the Autism Service, explains that in the first half of the 1900s, many children who demonstrated non-typical social behaviours were often institutionalised, where individuals received residential care but were not given any support tailored to their needs. Although this institutionalization was claimed to be for their own good, it feels like a lot of the time it was about minimizing the discomfort of holistic and abled people without any regard for how the autistic and disabled people themselves felt.
Holistic is a word to describe someone who isn't autistic. It's a useful term as it doesn't frame autism as being a deviance from normal.
Do we even know enough about brains to decide what the norm for brains is? It's a very complex beast. Some brains just work in an unexpected way. It is what it is. But in the 1960s and 70s, behaviorism became popular. It focused on encouraging target behaviours and eliminating problematic behaviours. So behaviours, but not the root causes behind them. The approach focused on fixing surface level problems and on compliance, but conformity can be harmful, leading to anxiety and trauma. One of the pioneers of this quote-unquote treatment for autism, Ole Ivar Lovas, also practiced LGBTQ+ conversion therapy. So you know it definitely works. A 2018 paper published in the journal Catalyst, Feminism, Theory and Technoscience by Margaret F. Gibson and Patty Douglas describes how these interventions were systematic attempts to slap, shout, reward, shock and ignore autistic and gender non-conforming behaviours out of children.
The emphasis was put on making autistic people hide their autism in a way that, again, feels like it prioritises the convenience and comfort of holistic people. Well, I mean, that's all in the past. What's it have to do with how everyone's autistic nowadays?
Unfortunately, it's worth noting that the institutionalisation of autistic people hasn't necessarily ended completely. A post from the National Autistic Society in 2024 notes that the Assuring Transformation NHS digital data shows that in August 2024, 1,365 autistic people were in inpatient mental health hospitals in England. The post explains that it is widely recognised that for most autistic people, care in an inpatient unit is rarely helpful. In fact, it can be deeply damaging. The average length of stay is around 4.8 years, and we continue to hear alarming cases of over over-medication, seclusion, and unnecessary restraint.
And a National Autistic Society blog post from April 2015 points out that not only do the latest figures show that the NHS and government failed to meet their target to reduce the numbers of autistic people in mental health hospitals, but the number of inpatients has actually increased.
The historic institutionalisation of autistic people is an important piece of context in understanding why it might feel like there are far more autistic people nowadays. While we still have progress to make, autistic people have significantly more autonomy today than they did in the past. You're going to see them in the shop. Because yes, they're allowed to exist visibly in the world, and that's a good thing.
Of course, I'm not trying to imply that everyone who has questions about the increase in visibly autistic people wants to return to a time when autistic people were locked away, though we might talk about some people who do seem to want that later in the video.
But that doesn't explain all those articles I've read about how easy it is to get an autism diagnosis nowadays. Data, definitions, and access to diagnosis. There has been an increase in autism diagnosis over the last few years, but although diagnosis is becoming more accessible, that's definitely not the same as it being easy for autistic people to get a diagnosis or to access the support they may need. Part of the reason for this increase is that we understand autism better now than we did even a couple of decades ago. Early research was carried out almost exclusively on white, cis autistic boys, and always by holistic scientists. I've mentioned this before, but I think it's pretty significant that we began to see criticism that autism and ADHD are being overdiagnosed at the point when it became easier for women and people of marginalised genders and people of the global majority to access diagnoses. Golly, wonder why?
When it comes to my personal experiences, it is a tiny bit frustrating that I had to wait for an understanding or a diagnosis of my ADHD until I was in my 30s because of the misogyny in how neurodivergence is perceived and diagnosed. People looked at little Jessica, who struggled to have only one thought at a time rather than 200, or go to sleep, or capture attention, or just not blurt out every secret you ever gave her, and decided that I must have dyslexia. Because obviously girls can't have ADHD.
Nowadays, we understand that not everyone who is autistic is white or cisgender or male, although we still have a long way to go. As John Elder Robinson and Dina Glasser wrote in a 2023 article for Stat, too many marginalised people go undiagnosed thanks to screening tools that are less effective for people of colour, those with gender minority identities and some with cultural differences. As tools and expertise improve, diagnosis will continue rising, and inversely, famous symptoms like not making eye contact don't apply to every case, right? Some children are raised in cultures where making eye contact with elders is deemed to be rude. And if they are then surrounded by other children who are making eye contact, sure, that might stand out. Perhaps more than the girl standing next to them who happily makes eye contact, but is autistic. And that's why doctors look at more than one thing when they're diagnosing people, because they now know that autism affects people differently and in a range of ways. This increased understanding of what autism can look like for different people means that more people are getting diagnoses, but also that researchers are having to reconsider what percentage of the population might be autistic. A 2021 study into the prevalence of autism in school children in England reported that we can now see that autism is much more common than previously thought. The researchers attributed this increase to autism being better understood by both parents and schools, but also pointed out that the data used in the study was based on school records, which usually underestimate the actual proportion of children who meet diagnostic criteria.
In short, it's likely that future research is going to find that more people are autistic than we thought, and again, that's not a bad thing or something we should be scared of. Brains come in so many variations.
You know the graph showing how left-handedness massively shot up when we stopped hitting children for being left-handed? Yeah, it's kind of like that. The graph often gets used to explain the increase we've seen in people coming out as LGBTQ+ over the last couple of decades, but I think it's also relevant here. Increased awareness and acceptance of autism means that autistic people are just less afraid to be openly autistic. As writer, speaker and creator Lou writes in an Instagram post, for too long, autistic people were forced to struggle on, not knowing who we are and why we struggle with certain things. Autistic people were forced to suffer. Autistic people, back in time, were not able to access support or help. This is not a good thing. It isn't a flex that society for too long has hidden autistic people away and hasn't given autistic people the support to understand themselves. And while I believe this only applies to the US, the 5th edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which was published in 2013, allowed people to be diagnosed with both autism and ADHD for the first time. In an article for Psych Central in 2023, health writer Sean Ferguson notes that, given that the CDC estimates that 14% of children had ADHD in 2016, it's possible that many people weren't diagnosed with autism because they already had the diagnosis of ADHD. When I was diagnosed with ADHD, my doctor had to explicitly write on my notes that my issues couldn't be explained by autism in order to give me the diagnosis. Which is another reason why the number of people with autism has increased because, surprise, people can have more than one disability or neurodivergence. Who knew? I see. Because everyone's a little bit autistic, right? Not quite. I'm going to let autistic and ADHD content creator Ella Willis take this one. This is a clip from their interview on BBC Radio Merseyside about autism misconceptions.
I think the big one is that everybody is a little bit autistic, which is not true. I think that comes from the use of the word spectrum. I think people take that as meaning that everybody's on the spectrum, but autistic people are at the higher end, when actually the spectrum is there to describe autistic people, and it's not one end or the other. It's more like a colour wheel, a colour gradient spectrum where there's an infinite amount of spaces that an autistic person could take up in there.
And while every autistic person will need different levels of support, it's very clear that the resources needed simply don't exist, even to get a diagnosis, which is often required to then access the support. Waiting lists for autism assessments are absurdly long. A BBC article from March 2025 reported that a 34-year-old woman in Oxfordshire was told she'd have to wait 16 to 18 years for an assessment. She could have a child. It could grow to be an adult in that time. Meanwhile, another BBC article published the same month delivers the depressing news that NHS Tayside has stopped all new referrals for ADHD and autism to its child and adolescent mental health service due to increased demand for assessments. The Health Board said the nationwide issue of a sharp increase in referrals for neurodevelopmental assessment had led to an extensive waiting list. I don't know, maybe hire more people to do the assessments so you get more done. Oh, I don't know. Is a diagnosis really important? We don't want to start over-diagnosing people now, would we? Well, a 2023 study by University College London found that the true number of autistic people in England may be more than double the number often cited in national health policy documents. The lead researcher, Dr. Elizabeth Onions, explained that getting a diagnosis can make a huge difference to autistic people because they often experience discrimination and exploitation in society. They may have unmet support needs, even when they appear to be coping with life. Having a diagnosis means that someone can advocate for their right to reasonable adjustments and the support that they need. Far from autism being overdiagnosed, there are many autistic people still being let down by systems that aren't built to support them. But are you sure people aren't just saying they're autistic because it's trendy now? Not trendy, not an epidemic. Another part of why it may feel like there are more autistic people now is that there are so many fear-mongering headlines and quote-unquote experts telling us that we should be worried about how many autistic people there are nowadays. Oh, so many of those people, and yet it's a tiny percentage of the population, but if certain people just won't shut up about it, then yeah, I guess you are going to be talking about that a lot. The last few years have seen a number of prominent UK media figures use their platform to demonise and dehumanise autistic and other neurodivergent people. Why? What do you get out of it?
It's a super fun time to be disabled in the UK right now.
Speaker and author of Outrage, Why the Fight for LGBTQ+ Equality is Not Yet Won and What We Can Do About It, Ellen Jones dissects one of these terrible articles in an Instagram post, in response to Telegraph continuing to spout anti-disability and anti-neurodivergent nonsense. For those of you who don't know, Telegraph, commonly known as the Tory Graph, is a very dumb right-wing newspaper. It has a lovely property section with fancy houses that none of us can ever buy. But other than that, it's rubbish, it's trash. I guess you could line a gerbil cage with it. She asks, what is so bad about a rise in disabled children? What is so bad about parents and carers getting support for their autistic children? This article seems determined to continue the trend of the British press in undermining autism and ADHD as somehow not proper disabilities or something to be doubted. The majority of researchers and experts agree that part of the increase in autism diagnosis, and thus increase in autistic people being able to access the support they need, is an increased awareness of autism. It's writers and speakers and activists, including some of the people who I've quoted in this video, talking openly about their experiences of being autistic, who are helping to change the narratives around what autism looks like. Social media has also been a huge part of this shift, as it allows autistic people to make their own voices heard in a way that wasn't possible even 10 years ago. If you'd never heard an autistic person talk about their experiences before, and suddenly in the last few years you've come across 1 or 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 people talking about being autistic, it makes sense that it feels like there's been a massive increase in autistic people. But how many other people did you hear talking in that time? Especially when mainstream media still seems to give prominence to autistic people, which feeds into infantilization of autistic people, who are often spoken over rather than being allowed to speak for themselves. Of course, it's important to remember that autistic people all have different needs. There are autistic people with learning disabilities and autistic people who are non-verbal or non-speaking. There are reasons why some autistic people need parents or carers to advocate for them. But columnists writing that ADHD is fashionable and a social contagion isn't helping anyone. This demonization of autistic and other neurodivergent people by the mainstream media feels very similar to their dehumanization of trans and non-binary people. It's almost as though our oppression and liberation are connected. But wait, all those people talking about autism don't look autistic. There is no such thing as looking autistic any more than there is looking queer. Is it? No. In fact, many autistic people put a huge amount of effort into masking and looking neurotypical. I want to share this Instagram video by yours, a filmmaker and ADHD mental health advocate, about realising the effort she puts into performing the right facial expressions when they're around other people.
So my face doesn't always match how I feel. And it happens a lot, and people get confused. And so how I then try to mask my autism, I just realized this, can you imagine? Because I'm like, yeah, you're not supposed to, like the rule pops up in my head, you're not supposed to smile when you say this, you're not supposed to smile.
Robinson and Glasner write in There is no epidemic of autism, it's an epidemic of need, that many environments encourage masking, the practice of hiding one's autism, despite research demonstrating the harm that occurs when autistic persons cannot live authentically. Basically, you can't tell by looking at someone if they're autistic, especially in a society that punishes people who are visibly autistic. Now I'm just making it sound like I'm being silly. There are real experts who are worried about the rise in autistic children. Okay, fine. Let's talk about him. Let's talk about the US Secretary of Health and Human Services' ridiculous pledge to find the cause of autism by September. A BBC article by Mike Wendling in April 2025 reported that during an interview with Fox News about his plans, RFK said, "We're going to look at vaccines. We're going to look at everything. Everything is on the table. Our food system, our water, our air, different ways of parenting, all the kind of changes that may have triggered this epidemic." Well, it's important to ask these questions. But hun, we do have a definitive answer to the question of whether vaccines cause autism. They don't. Am I scared of my newborns catching measles? Yes. Am I scared of my newborns catching autism? No. If they're autistic, they're autistic. They didn't get it from something we did, or because we held them too close to a stream one day. And for autistic people, it is really hard to hear that there are people who would rather their child risk catching an entirely preventable disease like measles than ending up like them. As journalist and author of The View from Down Here, Lucy Webber, tweeted in March 2024, every single "ADHD isn't real, overdiagnosis is bad" article is based on the ableist idea that to be disabled or thought of as disabled is the worst thing that could possibly happen to you. And also that those of us who are diagnosed are just, useless members of society now. Oh no. Wendling's article continues, in a statement, the Autism Society of America called Kennedy's plan harmful, misleading, and unrealistic. Autism is neither a chronic illness nor a contagion, the society said. Christopher Banks, the Society's president, questioned whether the research efforts would be transparent and said claims that autism is solely caused by environmental factors were misleading theories which perpetuate harmful stigma, jeopardise public health, and distract from the critical needs of the autism community. It's horrific enough that British media figures can essentially make up whatever they want about autistic people. It's worse when the person spouting misinformation is the US Health Secretary, who has even more power to impact how autistic people are treated, and seems to have decided to double down on further stigmatising autism. As Lou points out in this Instagram reel, all of this feels like a distraction from the lack of support and resources for autistic people, and how they are being failed by their governments. So an especially depressing part of the research for this video was discovering that people have been fear-mongering about an autism epidemic due to a rapid increase in diagnosis for at least 20 years now. Find a new hobby. 3 reasons not to believe in an autism epidemic. A 2004 published in Current Directions in Psychological Science debunks the idea that people should worry about an autism epidemic, explaining that no sound scientific evidence indicates that the increasing number of diagnosed cases of autism arises from anything other than purposely broadened diagnostic criteria coupled with deliberately greater public awareness and intentionally improving case finding. Why is the public perception so disconnected from the scientific evidence? The paper goes on to talk through some key places where misinformation about autistic people has been perpetuated. Though I'm not going to go through those in detail, as I feel they're less relevant 2 decades later. However, the paper does include something about the choice of epidemic when talking about autism that I thought was interesting. Epidemics also connote danger. What message do we send autistic children and adults when we call their increasing number an epidemic, a pandemic, a scourge? The word choice frames people who are autistic as unwanted, reinforcing a message that many autistic people grew up being implicitly or explicitly told. At this point, I think it's worth asking the question, are people just uncomfortable with autistic and disabled people living their lives visibly and existing in public? Autistic and abled people's discomfort. I'm really hurt. I'm totally fine with autistic people. I just don't understand why people need to limit themselves with all these definitions. Whilst I can't speak for autistic people or even all disabled people, I do not think calling yourself autistic is limiting. Personally, I'm proud to be disabled. Of course, that doesn't mean that there aren't days where my disability doesn't make my life harder, but it's not calling myself disabled that limits me. The existence that RFK imagines for autistic people is incredibly limited. In an article from Mother Jones in April 2025, Julia Matreau reports that, when talking about autistic children, Kennedy declared these are kids who will never pay taxes, they'll never hold a job, they'll never play baseball, they'll never write a poem, they'll never go out on a date. Many of them will never use a toilet unassisted. We have to recognise we are doing this to our children. Does he know any autistic people? People's existence doesn't have to be justified by them paying taxes. Autistic people and disabled people are continually told we have no value if we cannot work or contribute to society in ways that generate wealth for other people. We need to collectively unlearn that traumatic idea. Whether or not someone will ever pay taxes is not an indicator of whether they will have a good life, even though I do sometimes use it as a metric of when I felt like I became worthy as a person. I pay taxes. You should listen to me. We're all a work in progress. Whether or not someone needs help using the bathroom is not an indicator of having a good life. In her article, Matreau interviews autistic poet Elizabeth McCallan, who says that no matter the support needs of autistic people, they are still people. They have a right to live and a right to dignity, and that's not what he wants for us. He is using the straight-up eugenicist playbook. People who can't go to the toilet by themselves are still people. People who can't write a poem are still people. It is clear that RFK doesn't see autistic people as people. He might claim to only want to find a cause for autism, but it's clear he's looking for a cure. As McClellan continues, you can't eradicate autism without eradicating autistic people. People being visibly autistic might make autistic people uncomfortable. Some people anyway, or might require us to challenge some of our own biases and preconceived notions about autism. Autistic people get to be loud and proud and visibly autistic, even if that doesn't fit within the societal norms of a society built for holistic and neurotypical people. There are more autistic people now because autistic people are increasingly able to access diagnosis and allow the support that allows them to feel supported and be themselves and be free and not have to go to a farm in the country that they somehow never return from. There are more autistic people now because autistic people are increasingly allowed to exist in public.
After all, according to the World Health Organization, around 16% of the world's population are disabled. That's 1 in 6 people. Is it really so surprising that there are so many autistic people?
There are more autistic people now, and that's a good thing. In conclusion, I hope you found this video helpful in breaking down the factors that contribute to why there are more autistic people now, and why that's not a bad thing. This video has been pretty heavy, so I'd love for you to leave a comment and share something that is bringing you autistic or neurodivergent joy right now.
You could also shout out your favourite autistic and disabled creators and educators. I mean, I definitely need more people to follow and learn from. It would be lovely if we could, help each other out and find resources. Helping me learn.
I just want to say a massive thank you to my clubbies for all of your support. Clubbies is the name for members of the Kellgren-Fozard Club, which we have here on the channel, and joining gets you access to some very cool perks, like a monthly exclusive behind the scenes video, plus a shout out in your birthday month. Also, special thank you to clubbies because they are paying for my maternity leave, so very much appreciated. Thank you, thank you, thank you. My wife very much thanks you too.
Clubby's comments also rise to the top of the comments section, which I feel really contributes to the comments section being a lovely and supportive place. Oh, and you get a little Jessica icon next to your name when you leave a comment, with an increasingly large crown. Oh, that is quite cute, yes.
Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.